Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and today I'm very, very honored to be interviewing a very special space champion, Dr. Parshati Patel. Dr. Patel is an astrophysicist, science communicator, and STEM education researcher based in London, Ontario, Canada. She is the Educational Outreach and Communication Specialist at the Institute for Earth and Space Exploration at Western University. She is on leave from her position as she is currently on secondment to the Canadian Space Agency, where she is the program designer and education advisor in the Communications and Public Affairs Department with the Youth STEM Initiatives team. Dr. Patel is also an adjunct research professor in the Faculty of Education at Western University. She has also been communicating her passion for space science and technology with students and the public for the past 9 years in various capacities through outreach opportunities and programs at Western University. She develops and leads classroom projects in camps, produces podcasts, organizes public events, trains educators, and acts as a science consultant for children's books. Dr. Patel has co-founded Women of Color in STEAM Canada in 2018. Since June 2019, Dr. Patel has also been part of the Principal Scientific Advisors Consultative Group to the Government of India and is currently on the Board of Advisors for SEDS-Canada. As you can see, she is such an accomplished, inspiring woman, and I'm so excited to have the opportunity to talk and understand Dr. Patel's space journey on a deeper level. Welcome, Dr. Patel. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to conduct this interview.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm very excited to learn about really how you got involved in space. But before we get into that in more depth, first I'd like to know more about your typical day. What do you currently do and how does it run? And what did you do when you were, in previous past programs?
Yeah, so as a science communicator, it's an umbrella word that involves a lot of different tasks. And my time at Western included everything from developing programs to running events to talking to media, to really working with teachers as well and training them, training our graduate students as well. So my day-to-day life is very varied in science communication. One day I am working on developing events and trying to figure out, like, let's say, we have a theme. Here is a moon theme. Like, what are we going to do for that event? Who's going to be invited? Who are going to be participating? Who are going to be the speakers? Things like that. So I'm doing all the logistics aspect. And then on the day of the event, obviously, like, I'm on site working with a team of volunteers and graduate students and staff who are helping us put those events. So it varies a lot. Sometimes I'm on the desk, doing all the back end work and logistics and budgets and things like that. But on the other days, actually get to go into classrooms and attend events and talk to public and students about space. So it's not there isn't a typical day in my job, and that's what I love about it. It's different every day.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm talking with all these individuals, including yourself, everyone really says there's no typical day. Every day, even if you're like in a job and you're kind of been doing that for the past 15, 20 years, every day at a science job or as a science communicator is different because you're working on new topics, new research, new programs, technology every single day. And every time like I open social media, I feel like I find this new discovery or read about this new discovery NASA or some other space organization or company has made. And I'm like mind blown. Like every day space is changing. And so keeping up with it means a constant change. So that's what I love about space as well. The constant change instead of the same thing over and over again. So
Yeah,
like I mentioned,
I agree.
and like I've mentioned, you've been a part, and you were saying you were part of so many opportunities where you could communicate and reach out to a lot of students. So, whether it be research or doing these communication activities, what is the most exciting project or research that you've worked on or are currently working on?
So I think I would say couple of different ones. I'll highlight a couple of different ones. One of them is when I was doing my PhD. So like you mentioned, I'm an astrophysicist. I did my PhD a few years ago. I'm not going to date myself, but I studied massive stars and I studied how disks are on them, where eventually all the planets form. sometimes, not always, but these disks, I was studying them, and I was studying how it impacts the formation of the star, and how we can actually use just the light from these disks to interpret what is happening near the surface of the star, because these disks actually cover the star, and so you cannot really see the star. So you're doing like a detective work of trying to figure out what is happening without actually being there, and just using light and obviously our computational models to try to understand what we are seeing is exactly how we have our computer models behaving, right? So it was one of my favorites, just because I worked on it for 4 years. And interestingly, I only worked on 4 different stars for 4 years. It's such a large amount of work that one has to put in, the amount of models one has to run to find the things that you can actually observe and compare to the observations. So it's one of my favorite research projects, just because I got to, I was just introduced to the topic, saying, here are some big stars. These are young massive stars are called big stars. And they're like, so go around and look and see what interests you about these stars. And I knew what kind of tools I had at my hand. And so I was able to kind of connect the dots and see, okay, so no one had tried to study this very, very innermost regions of these disks that are very close to the surface of the star. And I have on my hand computational tools that can actually recreate those areas and help us understand what we're observing. So it was kind of born out of, my curiosity and like learning from all the papers that I was reading and figuring out, okay, people did this, but they did not get what they were trying to figure out. Some people did that, it didn't really work. So, trying to come up with that idea of what you want to do with it. And I spent 4 years trying to learn, what those disks were doing and how they were affecting the star. So that's kind of near and dear to my heart, just because of the amount of energy and thought that I've put into that research. Currently, like you mentioned, I also do research in the Faculty of Education. And that research is related to more of the outreach programs that we run at Western, and trying to figure out if these programs are actually having impact on the people who are experiencing them. So as an example, we developed a space-themed camp at Western, and we had a lot of students who would come and attend those camps during the summer. We had certain programs that were exclusive for, let's say 30 participants a year. They would have, interaction with the scientists during that week. They will get to play with like rovers and things like that. And we wanted to see if those experiences were having any kind of impact on their understanding of what space means, where you can go in your career with this, but also maybe if they were already interested, is this something that leads you to pursue or is making you more fascinated about space, or wanting you to be part of the space field, right? And so we're trying to, just with the kind of feedback that we receive, we're trying to understand what works, what doesn't work, what students like, what is most effective, and basically having those evidence of, we should be doing more of these, because they seem to be understanding these particular concepts more in depth if they're doing it this way. So kind of using that evidence-based method to understand what works and what doesn't work for these kinds of outreach programs. So that is the kind of research that I do. And that's also very interesting, because it was not something that I thought about when I was doing my PhD, is I'm going to go into, field of education and try to do something. So it's a little bit deviation from what I did in my PhD, but it still uses the same skills that I did in my PhD. So I really enjoy that as well.
Yeah, both of those research opportunities sound amazing and so informative, especially the 4-year research program on those discs must have been quite a journey for you. So I can understand why it's near and dear to you. And when you were mentioning that, it was really the scientific process, like figuring out what you have, what resources you have, looking at the literature review that already exists and being like, okay, this is the gap. And then I have this, I can do this. I think that's an amazing skill that every scientist needs to have. And definitely what you're talking about is measuring growth and seeing what works and doesn't when educating students. I mean, recently I did my Girl Scout Gold Award project, and for that we had to measure sustainability, and we had to measure how much students gained from the program. So I actually did a space webinar with students, and I collected all of their responses on different activities that I did, and was like, did this increase your space awareness? Do you want to go into a space career now? And I understand like that feedback is going to help me now in the future be like, okay, I need to do this and I need to do that. So I definitely agree that collecting that information is very, very important. And you were
Yeah, I
mentioning, yeah,
agree.
go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just saying that I agree that feedback is so important, especially for people who are developing these programs, right? Like you are developing these things, but are they working? Is that something that students are liking? Is that something that's helping them understand a particular concept or a process or a field? And if you don't have feedback, it just feels like you're doing things, but you don't actually know if it's working, right? So it's very important.
Yes, 100%. And you were mentioning, women of color in STEAM. And so I'm really curious because there's always a story behind, wanting to do something and pushing something forward. So could you tell us your story behind starting Women of Color in STEAM in Canada in 2018?
Yeah, so this actually came about when I was at a conference. It was a woman, women in science, women in STEM conference, and there were a lot of folks, from who were people of color, and we all were talking about, yeah, like women in STEM already. We all know that the number of women in STEM is low compared to men. We all were discussing that, and then the folks around the table were like, well, if you look at the underrepresented groups, there's another group that is underrepresented, that be people of color, Indigenous people, you have people with disabilities, LGBTQ plus. There's so many groups that are underrepresented in STEM. And so we were this group of women who were, like women of color. We all kind of relate based on our experiences, and all the four of us who co-founded this, we all had different experiences. A couple of us were from space background, other were from biology, and we all were thinking that even though we have come from different eras, we have studied in different places, but we have kind of similar experiences, and we wished we had certain set of help, mentorship, documentation, things that we could reach out and ask help for. Like, for example, simple things like, how do you navigate when you move from another country? Let's say if someone already has a degree, how do you navigate to integrate into the field, whether it's industry or academia? And if you generally look up to the people in your community and be like, is there anyone who can help me, right? And that's something that we thought was lacking, and it all came kind of from experience and us talking with each other. And we're like, we should probably do something, even if it means, just getting together, highlighting, amplifying other women of color, providing them support when need be. And also kind of, bringing that topic to the table where we have opportunities to do that. And so for the last few years, that's what we have been doing. When possible, we've been amplifying voices of women of color here in Canada, who are in the fields of, science, technology, engineering, arts, mathematics, and even medicine. So we are trying to make sure that everyone is included and feeling supported when they're needing that help.
That is so important. I feel like even when you don't see a lot of people like you in a certain industry you want to go into, especially an area like STEAM, when there's a lot of minorities, like you're mentioning, it's really difficult to imagine yourself in that position. And so, really a big part of starting this interview series, which is a Space Champion series, was to highlight diverse individuals, and show students out there that you don't have to look like someone or come from a certain background or, have a certain appearance or, smartness, ability. You don't have to have really any qualification. There's no standard where that makes you a part of space. And so really, if you go through the channel, there's such diverse individuals that I've met, and I'm like, wow, space is really not just these old males that is like portrayed out to be. A lot of students need to see all these amazing individuals that are so unique. And really, I'm glad that you were able to start that initiative and provide that network and support for people in Canada and hopefully across the world one day. And yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that it's been an opportunity where you not only provide role models to a lot of people, but also bring that message forward that everyone needs to see other people who look like them in those roles too, right? And a lot of people ask for these things. One of the other things that we really felt that would be really helpful for us and other people around us would be to think about, what is, let's say if I want to get into a space field, what am I going to look up? Who am I going to talk to? Who are these people who would be willing to help me? Or who are these people whose stories I could read or, watch videos like what you're making to understand what they do on their everyday basis, right? So it's not just one aspect that we think, it has such different I guess impacts on different people depending on what they're looking for, that we really thought that this kind of grassroots organization could really help and just amplify whatever others are doing, as well as bringing those kinds of role models to whoever needs it.
Yeah, and when you're talking, I really can see your love for bringing that inclusivity and that support to everyone. And so I'm curious, did you have obstacles, being a woman of color, coming into the space industry, or did you have relatives already, or was this a path that you had to, pave for yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always love talking about this particular because it is not a norm in where I come from. So I'm originally from Ahmedabad, Gujarat, India, and Gujarati people are generally known to be business people. They don't go into sciences. Maybe they do engineering, but they end up like doing a business because that's what you guys are known for. That's what I was told ever since I was young, right? Um, I knew people like in my family, there are people who have science degrees, but haven't really worked or like not really scientists. They've either left their jobs after they got married or they've just gone into business and own a business now. And so I never had anyone who was my role model to say as per my mom has a background in science as well, but she stopped working after she got married, so she wasn't practicing, but she was very she always encouraged me to go towards whatever I liked, and I stumbled upon astronomy. I didn't really even know there was a field that existed like that until I visited a planetarium, and I was like, ooh, people can actually study these things, and you can see more things other than stars and planets in the night sky. Like I didn't even know,
Yeah.
because I grew up in a very, I guess, polluted like major city. I never saw Milky Way like I do here. And so I never thought that that was a field until Googling. Google didn't exist at that time, but internet existed, and so trying to search for things and learning more about this kind of field, I really got fascinated, and I said, I really want to study this, but my parents are like, we don't know anyone who is in this field. Yeah, like maybe do bachelor's in physics and maybe think about maybe master's or PhD to go into this field, but for now, like maybe just do physics. And I was like, if I really want to study something, like I really want to start from scratch. Like I want to start from my bachelor's. And then if I see, like if I'm interested, like, I mean, I'm fascinated by it, but would I really want to do it 24/7 of my life, right? That's what my thinking was when I said, the only way, because at that time in India, there weren't any universities that would offer bachelor's in astronomy. And I think there are also very few at this moment too. Most of the time you have master's or PhD level. And I said, I didn't really want to wait until then, nor was I like a straight A student either. So like, there are only 60 or 80 seats that people can get to get into master's or PhD. And I'm like, 60 or 80 seats from entire India. Like there's no way I'm going to make it because I'm not like an A-level student at all. Probably did like 60s or 70s during my high school and like, close to maybe 75, 80s in my math and physics. But I wasn't like 90s or 95% or anything. And so I was like, you know what, let me see if there are people who would help me to figure out where I should go. And I really had an opportunity to chat with a scientist from the Physical Research Laboratory, which was a branch of the government of India that basically does research in the field of physics and astrophysics. And there was a scientist there. He suggested that being a woman, you're going to face a lot of troubles here. If you're privileged enough, and if you have a possibility, go abroad and try and see if you can do your bachelor's there. And that really struck with me because the way he was kind of concerned with me being a girl trying to pursue a field, and he was straight up saying, you are going to face a lot of difficulties. You will see that there aren't as many women in our department either. And so, for your sake, I would suggest you to go abroad. And I was like, okay, you know what? I'll look into it. and that's what I did. I ended up coming here, did my bachelor's, master's, and PhD, and I was very lucky to have great supervisors from a master's and PhD, and I never felt like I had any issues being a woman. But what I really saw during conferences and places I would go in the field of astronomy and space and industry, there aren't as many women of color. There aren't as many people of color, but then you look at leadership positions, there are very many women of color. And a lot of conferences, like I'm standing with a few people, I mean, look around the room and you're like, yeah, we're the only few women of color here. Or, there are a few more people of color, but you don't see that representation there. I never had any true role model in terms of in astrophysics. I had Kalpana Chawla was my role model when I was growing up, because I just felt like she was Indian. Though I didn't want to go into engineering, that wasn't really my thing. And I didn't want to be, at least now that I think of, like, not an astronaut. So she was a role model because she broke those barriers. She's like, she's an Indian girl. She went and she did this, right? And I was like, that was inspirational to me. And that was something, she's like the only person I know. Like, and again, like I said, like there weren't Google or social media thing wasn't a thing back when I was in high school, right? So she was kind of that person that I thought that, could be someone whose footsteps I could follow, like go abroad, study, get my education, and be able to step into this field. But as I step into it, like I can see that there aren't as many people of color. And so community is small, but it's growing. There are lots of students who are who are people of color, but it doesn't transcend into industry or into academia a lot, which I'm hoping will change in next few years, if not decade. But it's a constant thing that we have to keep thinking about. Every time I go to a conference or a meeting, I'm literally scanning the room. Why? Because I want to see, is there anyone who looks like me around here? And most of the time, answer is no. And if there are, it's very few people. So it's I wouldn't say I had like a real hard time being a woman to be part of it. It's more like there are women in the field, obviously not as many as men, but there are women in the field. It's how many women of color and people of color actually sit on the table is not as many. And that is something that I think all of us could work on and improve on.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I can definitely relate with what you're saying because I mean, no, but none of my relatives are in the space industry at all. Like all of like my family background really is like in the technology area, which is still in the STEAM, however, or like the medicine, but no one's involved in space. And whenever I like talk about my love for space, sometimes there's like, oh, you're into space? That's so different. And it's a good thing to be different. And it's also nice to see women out there who are advocating for this change and breaking those barriers. Like even within, if it's your family, within your state, within your region, I think it's really important to follow your dreams and chase after it. Because you were mentioning, it's really hard when you're in that environment and there's no example, finding that one person who you can look up to, even if it's not directly related, and be like, okay, this is my confidence. I'm going to push through and I'm going to follow my dreams. And I think that's so inspirational for every person out there, whether they're women or they're another minority out there, to not face that imposter syndrome that a lot of people have when they're by themselves, and try to find that network in that community. I think that's very important.
Yeah, I totally agree. Totally on with all of those points.
Yeah, and where you were mentioning how you didn't have any obstacles because you were a woman, it was more of that environment. However, did you have any obstacles? I mean, coming from a different country to study your higher education here, or anything in general, did you have obstacles in pursuing your career?
Yeah, I think one of the main obstacles, I guess, that I passed was when I came to the country, right? Because of that being very young, doing bachelor's, coming from, well, my family is not that conservative compared to a lot of the people I've known back home. But still, they had hesitation sending a girl by herself, like half around the world. You don't even know the country and all of those things. That was my first hurdle as, I guess, a woman I had to pass, was to convince my parents that no, I can do this, and being dead set on, yes, I want to do it. I don't care how, we need to get it, so that was kind of the first hurdle. When I moved here, I think one thing that really helped me, and I didn't realize that it was helping me until a few years after, was how excited and how passionate I was about studying, that a lot of the things that I think about, and this is, I've been thinking about them lately. I haven't had even chance during my master's and my PhD to think about the hurdles that I had when I moved. Only until very recently, when people have started asking me these questions, I've really sat back and thought about, what were the things that were really hard? Just because I was so excited, I never thought about them being obstacles. I always thought about them like, yeah, I can do that, and just like pass it on and not think about them something that's stopping me, right? But now that I think back, one of the things that I realized in my first year, so I did my schooling in India in English medium school. So you can do it in various languages. Just like here in Canada, we have French immersion, we have French school. In India, I did it in an English medium school. And I thought it would be so easy because it's English, like, you speak English in school in India. I do speak two other languages. My mother tongue is what I talk at home. But when I'll move, like, it'll be easy. When I came here, obviously it's English, but the accent is different and the speed is different, because all the people teaching me English back home are like non-native English speakers, right? Like they all have that. For them, English is also a second language. Same for me. So when I came here, I think my first hurdle was to literally sit through class and actually understand what the professors were trying to say. And I do remember distinctly that for the first couple of semesters, I was just like, oh my God, like this is too much. I'm just going to write down whatever they're saying. Because back then, sometimes they would give you slides, but not always, especially the math classes. They'll do the math on the board and they don't even like bother to give you any solutions or anything like that. And I really had a hard time grasping whatever I could. And I think the first year was the hardest. And as it got, as I got to learn the techniques and things that people were using, it became more and more easier. But that was, I think, my first hurdle. The second one was actually making friends. And this was so surprising to a lot of my family and friends back home, was because back home, I had probably like the largest group of friends you can find in the university and school. Like I always had friends surrounded by me. But when I came to here, I was suddenly like, oh my God, can they understand what I'm seeing? Like, do they understand my accent? Do they understand, do I understand what they're saying? Because when you grow up in a different country, a lot of the examples you have or things that you relate to are very different than other people. So, over here, people were talking about Star Trek and Star Wars, and I never understood what they were because I did not grow up with that. And so I always felt like I didn't fit into to conversations they would have. And so in the classrooms and otherwise, like I would be someone who would just like be like sitting on the last bench, not talking to anyone. I didn't have any friends. And I think I was forced to make friends when some of my courses included, you need to partner up with someone and work on a presentation or a project. And I'm like, oh my Lord, I don't even know anyone in the class. And I remember the first time that happened, I actually went to the professor and be like, I don't know anyone. I don't have any friends in this class. Who do I pair up with? And there was another person in the class, and he's like, we have someone who is, who I had seen sit again at the last bench on the other side of the class. And like, we never talked to each other. We're now best friends, but, he had to kind of bring us together and be like, you two work together because you two are the only people who don't have partners. I'm like, I guess that's going to be the thing. And, in hindsight, it just feels like it's a small thing that I didn't have, I did not know anyone, but there was a whole thing in the background that was going, whether or not I fit in, if I talk to them or if they understand me. There's this whole process that I never thought about when I was going through it. I kind of look back at it and I figure out, okay, that was the reason I wasn't talking to a lot of people. So that was, I think, my second hurdle, and it started getting much more easier as I figured out that I couldn't pass courses if I wouldn't have friends. Because a lot of the astronomy and math courses in your upper level, and actually in astronomy, there are a lot of courses where they actually ask you to work together. They're like, you're not going to be able to solve this by yourself. You work together, you write everyone's names, whoever worked on it together, everyone gets the same mark. And so I realized that I have no choice but to start talking to people. And I kind of forced myself and started. And that was, I think, year 3. So you can imagine it took a while for me to figure that process out. So I think that was the second hurdle. And then the third one I would like to mention was the fact that when I was starting my undergrad, I did not realize, because I came from India, computers weren't as popular back home in India as they were here. And so here, a lot of the students already worked on their assignments on computers and things like that. It wasn't a thing back home. So I did not know coding. I mean, I knew how to do PowerPoints and, graphs and stuff on Excel, but beyond that, I didn't really know much. And I realized by year 2 that coding is a really important aspect of, no matter what science field you're going to go into, especially if you want to go into research. And so I had to take a summer off, go back to India. I took courses on coding over there, and I came back and had to apply because the softwares that I was using here weren't available back home. And so I just had to learn basic coding, and then I had to come here and apply. So that was the third hurdle, which I think it took me a while to figure out that is something that I need. And then when I did figure it out, it did make my life easier very much. And I most like my PhD like really involved all coding. So, I ended up coding for my research, but it's something that I didn't realize early on. And a lot of people don't know that a lot of the research in a lot of the STEM fields actually require coding.
Yeah, I mean, those obstacles are definitely ones I think that a lot of international students can agree with. I mean, when I go back to India sometimes for vacations, I have cousins who live there. And when I talk with English with them, like I can understand them because it's English, but they can't understand mine because of like the speed I talk in. Same thing. If I'm trying to talk in my mother tongue, I can't understand them sometimes because they're so fast and they're so good at talking in it. So I definitely can understand that language barrier. I can't imagine going to a different country. Like for example, I learned French in school. Like I can't imagine going to France and studying. I would be completely lost. So I think it's a great thing that you were able to do that and you were able to overcome your obstacles, whether it be learning programming and overcoming that fear of friends. I feel like even in schools these days, there's this small like in friend groups, there's like this small bias almost. Like I feel like a lot of Indian students hang out with Indian students, a lot of, Black students hang out with other Black students. I feel like there's this inherent like bias almost, and I feel like we're overcoming that slowly by becoming more integrated. But that's definitely something that I can understand from a student who came from a different country. It must have been difficult, but I'm so glad to see now that you're such an outgoing, social and friendly person, which you probably were before too. It was just a step of confidence, a leap of faith. So I'm glad you're able to find that.
Yeah, and I think one thing I would also mention that during that undergraduate phase, well, I do not know if people would understand me or if I'm understanding them, not having friends. Before I used to be like, I would always be called in the class being like, you're the most talkative person. I'm always talking, I'm happy to stand up and talk about things, but I didn't have that in my undergrad just because of that. I kind of closed off myself, not knowing, what I should be saying when and things like that. But it took me my entire undergrad and a tad bit of my master's. And it wasn't until like a volunteer opportunity to do a podcast. Again, I took it because they told me that I was going to be behind the scenes work. And I was like, oh, behind the scenes work, no one cares like how my voice is going to sound or how I'm going to sound, right? It's just mainly editing and stuff like that. And I started doing outreach for that reason. And what I realized was that slowly they had to, they were like, well, you'll now have to go into classrooms if you want to get paid to do this. And I was like, well, I'm glad to get paid to, produce podcasts. But then it will also mean that I need to be in front of in this case, the mic, in a podcast, and be also in front of a classroom talking. And that's when, again, I was like, oh my God, are people going to be able to understand me, right? However, as I did more and more of those, I realized that people don't care. Like people are okay with, my accent being different as long as, I'm able to be, my pace can be slow. If I want it to be slow, be fast. If I need it to be fast. And I learned that. It took me a couple of years to figure that out, but I learned that people don't care. And then since then, I'm just like, I cannot stop talking again.
And I think your accent is actually like you can't even tell that this is not like your first language. I think, as you get used to living in a certain place, you just pick up the accent. It's just the first initial like journey. I feel like regardless of whatever it is, this case, it was a language barrier, but it could be anything. It's always like the beginning. I feel like from what I've heard, the beginning stage of an obstacle is difficult, but once you get over that little hump, everything else becomes a lot smoother.
Yeah,
And so,
definitely, I agree.
yeah. And so did you always imagine yourself in the position you are in today, developing this organization for women, of color in STEAM, and, getting into so much research, working with the Canadian Space Agency? Like, did you imagine yourself being able to do all of this?
Not really, because when I moved to Canada to study astronomy, realistically my goal was, and I guess it was until very end of my PhD, my goal was to go into research, do a postdoctoral fellowship, and find like a professor position, which is a lot like a traditional route, as people say, to what when you do a PhD, this is what people do. I realized, a year before I was going to graduate, this is like you have your advisory committee and you talk to them. And one of the things I realized was that, I don't want to do a postdoc if I have to move outside the country, because I'm like, I've already moved once from India to Canada. And then internally in Canada too, I moved from Toronto to London. And I'm like, I don't want to keep moving. That's something that I'm kind of tired of, but I knew going into that meeting that realistically the only way I could get postdocs is, and people actually prefer doing that, is doing postdocs where you haven't done your PhD. So being in a new environment with new set of people. And I understand why that's the reason, but I really did not want to move. I was like, this is not what I want to do anymore. And so I went in with an idea. I said, okay, I have a postdoc. I could possibly do a postdoc if someone here in Canada would want to, do the same kind of research that I'm doing. But then there are alternatives. I could go into industry. A lot of my friends were going into industry, like data science and technology and software engineering. A lot of people were doing that. You have such strong coding and data analytic skills in your PhD that a lot of people pursue that. I didn't really I used to code and I liked my research, but I do not like coding. I had to code for my research. I had to code for my research, but I could not see myself do that 24/7 for my job. I'm like, that is not what I want to do. And then the third option I said was, well, the only other thing I know I'm good at is science outreach. I've been doing a lot of the programs at Western. I've been working at the observatory for a couple of years, and I've been doing a lot of media and developing a lot of programs and running the programs. So I've been doing a lot of those kinds of experiences during my PhD. So I had a huge I guess, a length of experience in that field. And I said, these are my three options. And realistically, I don't see postdoc. I would go to the industry if I have no other option. That's my last option if I have to go. And then I said, outreach. But the thing that I did not know at that time was whether someone would pay me to do that. I said, I volunteered a lot during my PhD, and I was a teaching assistant to a lot of the programs that were outreach programs, but I did not know someone would pay me a living wage and pay me full time to do outreach. And my advisory committee was like, well, there is no harm in asking around. People manage programs, people go into communications. And so realistically, they actually thought that the only two things they could see me doing was either be a project manager for a mission, because they thought I've been really good at managing people, and then B, doing managing some kind of outreach program. It was something that they could see me in. And so I was kind of confident saying, okay, so if they also think that this is something I could do, maybe I could find a job in this field. And so that's kind of a year before I was going to graduate, started to ask people around to see if anyone was hiring for someone in this education outreach program, and I would be willing to work right after I graduate. And luckily, the organization that I was volunteering for so many years was looking for someone to start. And so I was like, you know what, I will try and apply and try my luck, because I've worked there for a few years and I have that experience. So I never thought that I would be an educational outreach and communication specialist or even working in the faculty of education. Like that is, as I said, like completely far away from where my PhD is, but I'm utilizing the skills that I learned there in doing research there as well. And again, working with the space agency, kind of the same thing. Never thought about all those things kind of coming together, but here we are. You never know where you're going to end up when you get started.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you were able to really, kind of branch out and not just be single-minded, like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this. And you were able to be flexible and open. And I think that's the best part about your journey. It's always moving, it's always fluid. And so now that we were able to gain a better understanding of your research and your journey, which I mean, I have to say is truly inspirational to so many students out there who are first generation to a different country, have moved, are current foreigners. I think it's, amazing advice to always push through. And, I'm curious for my last question for you, which is, what advice do you have for young people regarding their pursuit of a passion in the STEM field, the space industry, really any job in general? Something that you wish you knew when you were a younger student, maybe in high school or beginning of college?
That's a really great question. And I love that question because I really wish I had thought about that when I was young. Is like, can I ask someone something that they would have said to themselves? I really wish that when I was in undergrad or even in high school, I did reach out to that scientist in the physical research laboratory who really helped me kind of figure out where I should go in order to do what. But I wish I had access to more of those kinds of people. People who do science, people who are passionate about something. At least scientists I know are really open to talk about their journey. They really like talking about their research. So if you're willing, or if you're interested in certain fields or a certain kind of research, look up people and reach out to them. Maybe you'll send like 10 emails and maybe get one response back. You have to understand they're busy, they get hundreds of emails like every week. They may not be able to get through, but that one person who will respond will likely be very helpful. Like, even if you're able to meet with them for half an hour and just learn about their journey, or just ask them a few questions. Okay, how do you get into this kind of field? Or what can you do? What can you as a high school student or an undergrad do to get into this field? Even those kinds of small questions, that can be very beneficial for you. And I didn't have access to that when I was in my undergrad either, but I wish I did, because then I would have learned coding earlier. I didn't have to wait until I realized I needed it for my assignment, so I had to learn it. But those are the things. People are very open to talk about it, especially with social media. A lot of them are on social media, like literally just send them a message, either DM or even just send, if you're on Twitter, just do a shout out and ask them questions. People are more willing to answer your questions. And so it has become very easy for you to find ways and just learn about the field that you want to go to. So, don't hesitate in asking. Sometimes you may get no, but there are a lot of people who would say yes and spend that half an hour with you to talk, or even just send you a message of what you should be doing. And that could be helpful.
Yeah, that is amazing advice. Throughout this process, I really, when I was asking for interviews, I feel like I was a little nervous at first. Like, these are all amazing individuals. I don't know if I'm qualified to, ask them because they're so busy. They're doing so many great things for the industry and the world. I feel like very small, and I feel like I shouldn't ask them. But then as I kept asking, I realized that they enjoy giving back and, inspiring the future generations to take their jobs, to take their careers, and really advance society forward. And they're looking for those passionate students who are interested in the space industry. And so, like, networking, making connections, finding those support systems and mentors, I think is very vital. So thank you so much, Dr. Patel, for that amazing advice, but also, sharing some of the vulnerable moments you had throughout your life that helped you make a better version of yourself. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
I had a really great time talking with you.